Audible is audio entertainment that entertains, educates, and inspires. For you, listeners of CreepGeeks Podcast, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/cheapgeek. Again, that's audibletrial.com/cheapgeek for your free audiobook.
Welcome to CreepGeeks Podcast, Season 5, Episode 218.
In this episode, UFOs, Pentagon UFO, Barack Obama, USS Omaha UFO, and are these modern Foo Fighters?
Yeah. All right, so here we are. Welcome back to the CreepGeeks Podcast. If this is your very first time tuning in, welcome. And if you've been here from the start, welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in this particular episode, in case you didn't know by the title, we're going to talk about UFOs. And this is based around the recent spate of UFO sightings that have been occurring.
Is it spate?
I don't know. As soon as I said it, I thought it was dumb, but we're going to roll on. So, anyway, so it seems like here lately, and we're talking about the past 3 years, UFOs have become the cool, hip sort of thing to talk about, right?
Okay.
And so we kind of took a look at some of these things, and we may have an unpopular opinion.
Sure.
So, we'll see. Yeah. So anyway, with this particular podcast, we have a couple different things that you can do if you'd like to contact us or maybe reach out to us or would like to spend a little time talking to us. The primary way is a phone number if you'd like to share something.
Yep. And that phone number is 575-208-4025.
Yeah, so you can leave us a voicemail. We also have a Facebook page. It's pretty active, so you can contact us on Facebook if you'd like to share or just basically ingest whatever it is we're sharing there.
Yep. CreepGeeks Podcast.
Yep. And we have an Instagram, CreepGeeks Pod, where you can basically find some of the wonderful pictures and things that we share. And we have a TikTok.
Yeah.
And you can see some of the stuff that we share there. If you go and look for CreepGeeks, you'll find us there as well. But we're going to move into the podcast and get started. So as we start most of our podcasts, and this has been a relatively recent thing, we have a 4TN term of the day.
Sure.
And that 4TN term is Foo Fighter.
Okay.
So I thought you were going to say it, but you're like, yes, that sounds great.
So a Foo Fighter, as deemed by Wikipedia, was the term was used by Allied aircraft pilots during World War II to describe various UFOs or mysterious aerial phenomenon seen in the skies over both the European and Pacific theaters of operations. Though Foo Fighter initially described a type of UFO reported and named by the U.S. 415th Night Fighter Squadron, the term was also commonly used to mean any UFO sighting from that particular period. Formally reported from November 1944 onwards, witnesses often assumed that the Foo Fighters were secret weapons employed by the enemy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you may have seen some TV shows where you see like these orange balls of light go flying around and, you know, doing the reenactment thing and the people in the fighter bombers looking all like, what is that? And that kind of stuff. And they largely have been unexplained.
Yeah.
You know, there's some theories, everything from plasma balls to remote control stuff to, you know, secret Nazi technology. But at the end of the day, nobody really knows. Some people think they're probes. Some people thought that they were designed to fly around the aircraft and cause problems. But, you know, some people even think it's like St. Elmo's fire, which is like an electromagnetic phenomenon. But I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing. So just in case you were wondering, the nonsense word foo emerged in the popular culture during the 1930s and was basically first used by cartoonist Bill Holman. So if you ever seen that 1930s cartoon.
Actually, we talked about that in an earlier episode.
Yeah.
So we went all into that history, like the Smokey Stover comics and stuff like that.
Yeah, that was a while ago, yeah.
Nobody relates to. In fact, when you hear the term Foo Fighter, you automatically think like Dave Grohl and music.
Yeah, and the band.
Yeah. Unless you
and Christopher Walken saying Foo Fighters.
Yeah.
So Foo Fighters, like that. So. But anyway, that kind of ties in the podcast as we kind of get deeper into it. So we figure we'll go through and we sort of set the stage with Foo Fighter, as we kind of do with most of the 14 terms a day or 40 in terms a day. We try to make it relate to what we're actually going to talk about. But let's get into UFO stuff.
Okay.
Now, what we're looking at here is a high-level overview of the reports and things that have been recently occurring. We'll just say the past 3 years or so, because it has become a sort of popular thing, and it's getting even more popular. And people are out there going, yep, the government's saying that there's aliens and all that stuff, and that's not exactly true. So, let's talk about some of the recent stuff. And there's all sorts of neat little articles out there for you to sink your teeth into. And as we find things to be interesting on the internet and things we want to talk about, we'd like to share them with you. And we do that with our podcast show notes.
Yes.
And our show notes are on our website. So if you go to CreepGeeks.com, you can find everything we talk about on the podcast and links and such all right there. So you can kind of click and scroll along if you want. You can also hear the latest episode of the podcast there as well. And if you have a favorite podcast player or podcaster type thing or program or app, you can basically find us everywhere. I mean, everywhere, like Google and Apple versions and Stitcher. And I mean, Spotify, anywhere you can find it. Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, a bunch of stuff overseas. But yeah, if you'd like to kind of, listen, you can certainly do that. You can also subscribe as well. And if you're one of these people who doesn't want to do the podcast thing and listen to it on your phone or device or whatever, you can also go to YouTube and you can go and do a quick search for Creep Geeks, and you can find our YouTube channel, which really just plays the audio podcast over again. So you can kind of play that in the window on your computer and go off and do something else.
Like dishes.
Yeah. And if you want to subscribe, as we share every podcast episode on YouTube, then you'll automatically know when we have a new episode for you to listen to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the first article says, bombshell UFO report from U.S. tipped to be the story of the century.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's a pretty inflammatory thing. It's like, what? Now, this is from the UK Express, or expressco.uk.
Yeah.
Right? And it pretty much talks about the report here, and it does show a nice little video that says UFOs need to be discussed by Jeremy Corbell.
Oh.
Where he talks about UFO sightings, and evidently Jeremy Corbell leaked some footage and basically says we need to kind of talk about what's going on here, right? So governments around the world have repeatedly denied this, insisting there's no evidence to support this, but the existence of top secret locations, most famously the U.S. airbase known as Area 51, right, has fueled speculation that the governments are not telling the entire truth. Okay, now this isn't a common thing. Ever since Roswell and everything else that happened like late 45, and even with the Foo Fighters stuff, it's always been thought that the government's keeping secrets. So, evidently, 60 Minutes did a documentary where they showed the leaked footage claiming to be the UFOs, and it's also reported that a Pentagon report described them as a national security threat.
Oh.
Yeah. Now, anything that can't be described that flies around in the air and it gets close to military aircraft or basically anywhere that may be considered a high sensitivity type thing, like a building, a location, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Can be considered a national security threat.
True.
Nuclear facilities, missile silos, the Federal Reserve, Pentagon, White House, all that stuff could be considered national security threats. So that's not necessarily the inflammatory part of what people are thinking, but people will automatically just assume, oh man,
But like, okay, even if it's...
Because we're going to put all this whole thing in a little bit of perspective, really.
Yeah, even if it's not like a extraterrestrial UAP or UFO, I mean, they're going in confined airspace and
yeah, I mean, you fly an ultralight one of those little hang glider looking motor on the back planes close to anywhere, you're going to get sort of the same reaction, right? Yeah. Fly a drone over there can be sort of the same thing. So since it's become more mainstream these days, and people are kind of talking more about it, and it's becoming more accepted. There's more television shows and talking about some of the leaked footage and the CIA footage and Navy footage with all these craft that are out there. It's become more commonplace, right?
Yeah.
And you even have a former president, U.S. I mean, former U.S. President Barack Obama, he talked about it on The Late Show. Actually, it's The Late Late Show with James Corden. He says, what is true, and I'm actually being serious here, is that there is footage and records of objects in the sky that we don't know exactly what they are.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's not really a bombshell, sort of thing. Well, of course, there's stuff flying around all the time, and when you can't identify it, we used to call it unidentified flying object, but now we're been asked to call it the unidentified aerial phenomenon, right? So, I mean, so really what's the big deal? It says we can't explain how they move, their trajectory. They don't, have an easily explainable pattern. And so I think that people still take it seriously and are trying to investigate and figure out what it is. So now we've got news of both reports, coming from and documentaries and things like that are basically shared after the Twitter account News for All sort of put it out there. It says it tweeted, UK government figures believe the publication of a U.S. government report on UFOs due out next month could become one of the stories of the century.
Okay.
Yeah. And the account basically talked from the so they used the Politico playbook as a reference to started posting these rumors that were coming out, right? And they talk about, the Whitehall incident and things like that, and just basically UFO sightings or UAP sightings that happened over in Europe and different places.
Yeah.
And it says there are increasing rumors among well-informed government insiders that the publication of the U.S. government report, which is going to be coming out next month, could be one of the stories of the summer indeed, right? And so they're really sort of hyping this thing up.
But
so many sightings, and all the ships have had sightings, and the USS Princeton and Nimitz, they track an aircraft that went 60 miles in 3.4 seconds, and all of this stuff, man.
The sightings are always going to be there. The sightings, the experiences, they're always going to be there. Now, yes, I do appreciate, Barack Obama going and saying what's true is there's footage and records, a very plain, basic answer. But that's not clickbait worthy and former president says UFOs are real.
They're really amping up next month's report of what they found and what they've been looking at. And this is the U.S. government and the military in general. And hopefully some of the information in there may kind of paint a clearer picture. And it's entirely possible that, what's actually going on. Who knows? Maybe we'll become the bombshell of the century. And they're like, UFOs exist. Aliens exist. It's all real. And I don't know what that's going to do to people if that's the case. But judging from our previous history and how the government handles things, that's not going to be the case. That ain't happening.
Yeah. I mean, and honestly, kind of what Mr. Obama's words were, and we've heard that same statement from other government officials. Yes, there are things that have been recorded or reported that we don't know the origin of.
Right.
And if that's truly the U.S. government's whole stance, then the only people really hyping this up into the fears or the hopes of, everybody, which
UFO followers, supporters, enthusiasts.
Then that's going to be a bigger letdown than, somebody scientifically proving that they don't exist.
Yeah.
Because you're amping up this expectation, and these clickbait headlines are like, oh my God, former president said this.
Yeah.
And it's disappointing. It's disheartening. That's what it is.
In some cases, it's, a little disingenuous, but
yeah.
I'm pretty much a skeptic. Not everything is an alien from outer space.
Yeah.
And not everything is an alien from another timeline, right? Or us from the future, I mean, because, I kind of want I want something to go and show up and go, here I am. And I go, what the hell is that? Kind of a thing where I just can't explain it.
Yeah. And
so that's my hang up with things. But I mean, some of these reports are kind of weird, like you've got, the fast mover and the ones that become real popular, but then you also have one that showed up from, it's a video from the USS Omaha that basically showed an unknown aerial sphere that just vanished into the ocean. And the Omaha is a littoral craft, right? So it's not what we consider a deep water ship necessarily, because we have ships and most of our ships can go anywhere around the world. Our U.S. Navy is one of the strongest in the world.
Oh.
Well, we have a class of ships that are basically, it's a literal combat ship And that's designed to be sort of like close water, sort of towards the coast operations. And it's sort of a smaller ship designed to do sort of some close-in type stuff, like close to the coast. Maybe the water's a little bit more shallow, like that kind of thing. But anyway, there was a video where they were tracking something. It was a spherical object, and it's sort of splashed down, because even in the video they say, man, they followed it, they tracked it, and then it splashed. And splash just means it went in the ocean. Didn't mean, actually kicked up splash and just sort of just boop. They say it's like a 6 foot, in diameter sphere that traveled alongside the Omaha for about an hour. So this thing was sort of paralleling them. As they're doing their things, and they were using the FLIR, which is forward-looking infrared camera that senses and shows heat signatures. And I've used the FLIR that they're talking about, or a version of it, because there's multiple different types of FLIR on these ships. And one of the ones I used was like it looked like giant binoculars that had FLIR attached to them, and it was mounted to the ship. And they blow anything away that you've seen anybody use in investigations and stuff on TV. These things are serious business.
I'm watching this video now, and it's kind of...
Yeah, so they're tracking this thing, and it's whizzing along beside them, and it's basically doing what they're supposed to do. And anything that they record or anything that they see is typically recorded, right?
Yeah.
So this is like in July of 2019, when there was more than one warship out there. This is right off of San Diego, because that's where they're kind of based out of, so on the Pacific side. And they're talking about, these things, and they kind of described them as being drones. Still unidentifiable. They don't really know exactly what it is, but they kind of looked at it as being, the first obvious answer would be, okay, that's some kind of drone.
Yeah.
And so they did a search. They seen this thing. They basically did all their high-tech resources, and the sphere just vanished into the ocean or from the screen, and it basically vanished from radar and sonar.
Yeah.
They found no wreckage on the surface.
Okay. I'm watching the video now, and the video itself is very interesting. You're watching something basically hover, stay still, hover, and then eventually crash or just fall out of the sky into the ocean.
Yeah.
But then they keep replaying it, and I'm like, okay, I've seen what I need to see. When they slow down the footage and see it just crash or disappear, that's interesting. And if it's a scout, like a drone scout, that's pretty compelling, because we have heard stories, and we've talked about those on earlier podcasts, where there's that theory of UFO interaction right off the coast of California and the Pacific Ocean,
So we've got these unidentified flying objects moving along, with these Navy warships. And so, that's a thing. If you've got something really close to it, anytime you get close to a military vessel, especially like a combat ship, there's going to be questions, because it's obvious. Come on, man, it's military. You don't go cruising up to a destroyer and go, hey, man, what's going on? Or any kind of craft like that, because, it's threat, man. You got to make sure you defend your ship and everything else. And it's the whole thing. It's the government. It's the military. Military is not there to, they're not cruise ships. They're there for a job. They're there to defend, protect, be defensive or offensive.
That makes me ask the question, if it's something small like this, like a drone or something that doesn't seem like a big giant warship from like a home planet coming in. If it's something small like this, why don't we attack it?
Because you don't know what it is. Okay, so the U.S. military pretty much has a policy where we don't attack. For something like in this particular situation, we don't just randomly just start shooting and attacking stuff. We have to be fired on first.
Okay.
Now, if it gets too close and it breaches certain criteria that's been established by whatever's going on, they may shoot first. But mostly, you don't just go randomly shooting stuff. You know what I mean? And there's been other incidents too where a ship was basically like a swarm of pyramid-shaped UFOs were kind of whizzing around, right?
Oh. And
according to Mystery Wire, it says pyramid UFO swarm over a Navy destroyer. So it's kind of like, So they're talking about certain things. They're talking about swarms and shapes and that sort of thing. And it's kind of like, okay, all this is pretty interesting, right? And nothing really, to me, is sort of screaming out, wow, that's a UFO, right?
Yeah.
So pretty much the Pentagon has to start taking this seriously, and they've started taking it seriously, and they've been releasing information, right? So there's an article that came out that says how the Pentagon started taking UFO seriously. And they kind of put it out there, and this is in the New Yorker, right? And it says, for decades, flying saucers were a punchline. Then the U.S. government got over the taboo. And, you know, it's the New Yorker, okay? I'm ex-military, was in the Navy, spent some time at sea, a lot of time at sea, doing all that stuff. And when I read stuff like that, I automatically get a little aggravated.
Yeah, because it almost makes like a classist divide between...
Well, it's a dispersion they put on the military with like, oh, you guys are, you know, warmongering, whatever. And I hate to say it, but we're not.
Yeah.
You know, we have a job to do. We do what it takes. I did what it takes, right? Whatever you're supposed to do to complete the mission. But see, UFOs and things like that weren't taboo. And the thing about military is that when it came to reporting things that you've seen that you couldn't describe, you needed to be able to kind of figure out what it is and report it.
Yeah.
You know? And if you couldn't report it accurately or get any sort of idea of what it really is, then, you know, there were channels for that. But mostly, for the most part, you know, you kind of had to be aware of what was going on in that particular environment, that theater, and there wasn't really necessarily a good way to be able to report something that you could not identify under the confines of what was currently going on in the military and how they currently want you to log and report certain things, right?
Yeah.
Well, later on, in the past couple of years or so, things have shifted a little bit, and they have created a way to basically document things that you've seen and report it.
Yeah.
We've talked about that in the podcast, but, you know, it wasn't necessarily taboo. It's just that you didn't report things that you couldn't identify and or explain because it's the government. And granted, you know, you don't want to go, hey, man, I just seen the craziest thing out there if you couldn't put it in any kind of context. But things do get reported, or they did.
Yeah. And just the whole verbiage used in this whole article, because it's like, you know, not just the military, but just in general, the way they're presenting this, like, for decades, flying saucers were a punchline.
Yeah.
So right there, you're starting off dismissively of not just the military, but anybody who has these experiences or does accept the belief and concept of UFOs.
Yeah.
And then it just, in typical New Yorker fashion, continues that way.
Yeah. And, you know, and here's the thing, and this is where I take a little personal offense for some of the things that get reported, right? Certain news organizations report people in the military as being stupid. Mm-hmm. And that's come from in the past where it's like, oh, people just join the military because they're too dumb to go to college or this or that or whatever. The military, the U.S. military, is some of the most highly trained and highly intelligent people on the planet, period. They are more well-trained than most. I mean, you can take an 18-year-old and you wind up training them up, and they're in charge of like millions and millions of dollars of equipment. And a lot of people didn't join the military to go to college and all that stuff. I mean, that's a benefit. You know, you join in exchange for your service, and, you know, you can get some benefits for education and things like that. You know, depending on what job you actually pick when you go in, because you have to test for the aptitude and the intelligence level for the job that you actually pick. I mean, sure, you've got people that maybe don't have a super tech job in the military, but you also have people that do. I mean, when 3 Mile Island started melting down in Pennsylvania back in the 70s or early 80s, I can't remember exactly when it was, they took military people off aircraft carriers, nuclear aircraft carriers, to go to that nuclear power plant and keep it from melting down, because they were the most highly trained people on the planet to take care of that. So when you read articles and stuff where they talk about how, and they kind of infer that the military is kind of ignorant, that's not necessarily the case. No, the military has to follow rules and regulations. They have engagement protocols and things like that. But it's getting to the point where it's like, okay, so here's what's going to happen. They're talking about disclosure and executive summaries and being able to report this sort of thing, and these alien craft and these unidentified aerial phenomenon and some of the events that have occurred, you know, to kind of make these reports more credible than not. And they're coming out and saying, we don't know what they are.
Yeah.
Which is a valid response. You know, don't know what it is.
But you could have taken what you just said and turned it into a 4-paragraph article instead of this very long, almost tirade against people, like going so far as to like kind of saying some very harsh stuff, pitting researcher against researcher. There's this big conversation of Keene versus Stephen Greer.
Yeah.
And I'm like, like at one point it says, there were some good people at the UFO conference, but some of them were making outrageous, grandiose claims, says Keene, and I'm like...
Yeah. And they talk about everything from like, retrieved craft and everything
Nordic
else.
Venusians.
Yeah, and when it starts to go off the rails, a lot of the credibility starts to kind of go away. And I think that's intentional,
Yeah.
But anyway, I digress. So the Pentagon is taking it seriously, right? And people in general act shocked that the Pentagon and the government hasn't been paying attention to this kind of thing. Because they have.
Yeah.
They make it out like, oh, well, this is kind of a new thing. No, I mean, things have been tracked all the time. They're aware of things that's been going down. And they're also aware of things they can't explain.
I mean, the proof that things have been tracked in some way or another is in our 14 term of the day, Foo Fighters.
Yeah. And so this is not like a new thing. But it's like they're making it out to be like, oh, the government's just been keeping everything a secret when it comes to this sort of thing. They just haven't said a whole lot. And the government's going to deny, because at the end of the day, why would the government deny things like this of this nature?
Yeah.
If it's foreign technology, right? Or if it's our own technology, or if it's things of that nature, you're going to deny it because, at the end of the day, the might of the military, as it's being projected across the world, you kind of want it to be that way. It's part of détente, right?
Yeah.
So, and they do try to keep things a little secret. During the Gulf War and just basically now you've got like embedded news reporters like with you.
Yeah.
For a lot of stuff. And it was kind of like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, why would you broadcast what's actually happening right then around the world? Because what you wind up having is that you lose the element of surprise, and you also lose a bunch of different elements that may sort of help secure your victory by having the news broadcast things like your position and what you're going to do next and everything else, especially when you're in a combat situation, So I don't know. It's kind of a thing. So the more I started kind of taking a look at some of these articles, the more I was getting slightly more aggravated. And it's like, okay, well, I can see why they wouldn't be completely honest and transparent about everything we have in our military and our technology and all this other stuff. But a lot of people get angry about that, and they're like, well, we should know everything that the government has. Everybody should know. It's like, shut up.
But what if
That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. It's like, okay, let's tell everybody exactly what we have, right, so that information can be stolen, technology can be duplicated, our own defenses can be used against us because they're going to make countermeasures to it. It's kind of like you don't need to know everything. And I understand that the government works for the people and all that stuff, but at the same time, you got to give them half a chance to do their jobs.
But then I always fall back on, yes, I do believe there is a certain level of need to know and disclosure when it comes to our military, technology, things like that. However, I feel like part of that is almost missing the message in the sense that what if the bigger truth is that no country, no government has a full grasp on what these are? And how would that present to the everyday Joe?
I think that's a valid point, and that's something that, hey, if you knew right now that there were UFO/aliens out there that could completely vaporize the planet, be absolutely nothing you could do about it, and could do anything they want at any particular time, how safe would you feel?
They haven't yet. So my answer is different than the average person.
Yeah, but here's the thing. You're going to have people that actually, care and freaked out and be nervous and scared about it. You also, at the end of the day, you have a scale, right? People who give a crap and people who don't.
Yeah.
And down at the bottom of the list, you're going to have the same people who just don't care about anything at all except going about their business and just either trust somebody to take care of it or they just don't give a crap, right? Mm-hmm. I kind of want to know that if something crazy happened, we'd have some level of defense. Now, chances are, if there really is aliens out there and UFOs and they can travel across the galaxy or do whatever, we have no chance.
Yeah, obviously.
So regardless of the movies you watch where it's like, we're going to sneak in here, we're going to give them a virus.
We're going to send Will Smith and Bill Pullman to rescue us.
And Jeff Goldblum, we're going to give them a virus. At the end of the day, But I'm starting to think that it's more likely not necessarily the case. I'm not saying that UFOs and aliens and stuff like that don't actually exist. I do think there is a large percentage of things that aren't explained and could exactly be that.
Yeah.
But I kind of come across a different sort of theory with this whole thing. And I started to write down, and I did this yesterday, which nobody cares about. But anyway, I came up with like 25 different things off the top of my head, doing absolutely no research at all. Right? So we're going to call this basically a little section that we have created called CreepGeeks Knee-Jerk Opinion Piece.
I should put that in the podcast notes.
It is in the podcast notes. Thank you very much. You're like, I don't see it. Well, I see your little cursor on my screen. Why don't you pop up to where it says CreepGeeks Knee-Jerk Opinion Piece?
Okay.
There you go. And see. So here's the opinion piece, and we're going to talk about this in great and agonizing detail as we roll through the podcast a little bit. And it kind of goes like this. These modern recent UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon, / UFO, sightings of sphere, diamond, triangle, tic-tac, cylinder-shaped objects, whatever, are modern Foo Fighter drones.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's look at this for a second. So military drone technology is incredibly advanced.
Sure.
And we don't really know. I mean, we know what we see on TV with Predator drones and things like that, these big ones that fly around. We've seen a couple of movies, but we don't really know how advanced they really are. Now, when I was on the ship, we were launching these rocket drones for another ship to shoot at because they were getting qualified, right? Remote controlled, all that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. That technology that we were using to launch these rocket-powered drones, they look like birds, you know, they kind of had wings and stuff like that, was from the early 60s.
Okay.
So to kind of put that in perspective, you know, World War II and Roswell was like, what, 1944, 1945, and, you know, there was like...
1947, yeah.
Whatever, man, they were flying around in little propeller planes and stuff like that. This thing is a rocket-powered, remote-controlled, and controllable drone. And the technology, as it came about, was like less than 20 years old from there. So it's kind of like, okay, so it's a little crazy. But anyway, let's just say that military drone technology is incredibly advanced. Some of the theories for Foo Fighters back in the 40s have been are drones. And what's another word for a drone, depending on the usage, would be like a probe, right?
Yeah.
So the theory that come up with is that, okay, so these things are really just drones / probes that are being used to sort of take a look at military might, if you will, and presence and power and, you know, all that sort of thing to determine the weaknesses and try to find and exploit some weaknesses of opposing countries, opposing militaries.
Okay.
And so to take a look at how some of these things might be able to do some of this weird stuff that we see, I mean, come on, man. They have nuclear batteries. The CIA had one that was shaped like a bird. It was like this little bird that flew around. It had a nuclear battery, and I think it could fly for weeks, if not months. And that was in the 60s, right? We've had drones since World War II. The Foo Fighters were in World War II. You know, and we do think that a lot of that stuff in general, now I'm talking about not just us on the podcast, but in general, a lot of the stuff that we see that was crazy was like, you know, Nazi technology. Like they were way more advanced than they should have been, whether they got helped by aliens or whatever, who knows, right?
Yeah.
So if you take some of the Nazi technology and you put it to use in the 40s, I could certainly see where there's a possibility that they may be able to come up with some kind of remote-controlled vehicle, a drone, whatever. Call it a Foo Fighter if you want. You know, the flying bell and all that. Is it a Hanboo or a Hanaboo, whatever that thing is called? I can never remember that. You know, and we later on got some of their Nazi technology because we got their scientists. You know, Operation Paperclip, we got the Nazis and the Nazi technology, and we put that to work. And then, you know, since World War II and like past Roswell and everything else, technology has rapidly progressed to the point where it's gone beyond what our evolution would normally dictate, right?
Yeah.
Because it's gone way past that and it's advanced at such a rate. And, I mean, here's something to think about. Is the modern technology really modern? Because there's also the theories going around that, you know, ancient alien theorists say no. Right? It's not modern. It's based off of old technology. So who knows what that. So there's all these sort of theories that sort of, you know, sort of ideas that come across together and sort of, you can weave this into whatever you want, right? But let's take a look at it. So we got the modern technology. It's been way more advanced. We basically technology from the Nazis, World War II has been progressing. The whole thing is like secretive, and let's be real on the down low with the technology we have, because what's going on is the Cold War.
Okay.
You know, nuclear bombs get blown up. Countries start developing in their own nuclear war programs and weapons programs. You get like Russia, nuclear bombs. And so it became the Cold War started happening. All these countries that are part of it are doing the same thing, testing this and sort of testing the capabilities and the military might. Right? Mm-hmm. And if you kind of look at some of the things that have been going on, let's fast forward to now, right? We have civilian drone manufacturers that for a low price of like $600, you can buy one of the most advanced toys you'll ever have as a kid.
Yeah.
I mean, we got one sitting right over there. It has avoidance detection. It's got GPS. You can program a route. You can do all that sort of thing. Well,
like even route home.
Yeah. And you can put incredible ranges into these things. Now, from there, in the popularity of drones, a little thing sort of popped up, and this is where I started paying attention. So DJI, a Chinese company, right, was basically told that they couldn't sell their drones to the government, and the government was not allowed to use their drones anymore.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Right, because of the Chinese software concerns, because what was the big threat? Spy.
Yeah.
And, you know, the threat, sort of intelligence concerns that occurred with that. Because while this is going on, China is modernizing, getting stronger, and doing all this sort of thing, right?
And, like, the security risk, because how easy it was to obtain that GPS and that intelligence information from these drones.
Yeah. And, you know, in around the same time with the Chinese software concerns in these drones, and all of a sudden there's a ban on Chinese drones in the government, the FAA, right, Federal Aviation Administration, went ahead and said, hey, some of these drone laws that we have here, we're going to lock them down. So it became a lot more stringent. You had registration, you had navigation issues and stuff you had to be aware of, fines, no-fly areas, a bunch of rules designed to keep people from using these drones. Which in itself, to keep the dummies from using the drones.
Yeah.
And also to lock it all down.
I just find that to be a conspiracy.
It could be.
Completely separate conspiracy, though.
Or is it related?
I mean, yeah.
Drone's right in the title, so I'm going to say it's related, right?
Yeah.
And so while this is going on, you had like video footage that came out. I'm not exactly sure to the date when, because I only seen it in a couple different places, where allegedly craft were seen flying over Area 51, releasing small drones from the back of it. And those drones were just whizzing around, flying on their own, and they landed in an underground hangar. That was a big thing. And it's like, oh, wow, did this come from an F-18 or F-16 or whatever, F-32 or 50, whatever, man.
Was that around the time where we were reporting about all the Colorado drones?
No, because that happened like a year later.
Oh, okay.
But see, the Colorado drones was a thing, too. And they came out and said, leave these things alone.
Yeah.
We don't know what they are or where they're coming from, and we don't know why they're flying around Dugway Proving Grounds, but leave them alone.
Oh.
And there was bunches of them, right? And they couldn't figure it out, and people were reporting them and all that sort of thing.
And then they just stopped reporting on them.
Right, because they were like, we don't know, they've stopped, they're gone, just leave them alone.
Yeah. And
then when all this is going on, maybe slightly around the same time frame, you had the Havana syndrome, right? Where some ambassadors were attacked with something, like in Cuba, whether it was a sonic sort of attack or a microwave weapon or whatever, don't even know, right?
And then they walked that back.
Yeah, and then they walked it back, but it's happening again. It happened to Canadians. It happened to, so it actually happens, if I read correctly, here somewhere in the U.S. So that was kind of weird, right? And then, while all this was going on, somewhere in between there, and remember, this is all off the top of the head here, California wildfires, right? And they showed some of the footage of that, and people going through taking a look and showing the YouTube footage, and it's like, how in the world can a fire burn that hot and burn a car to molten slag, like with Godzilla breath, and not burn the mailbox right next to it?
That kind of goes into my alternate drone theory, conspiracy theory, because that was, we see all these footage of these weapons or possible weapons during this wildfire, and unless you're Shane Dawson, you're not allowed. If you put footage up like that, it got taken down.
Yeah, and we're talking about the whole directed energy weapon thing.
Yeah, so and that happened, right? And whether it's real or not, and then and with the Tennessee attack, with the RV, allegedly there's footage of a big beam coming down and burning that thing, and then slightly thereafter, here comes the U.S. Space Force being created. So the U.S. basically officially is militarizing space, and they brought it out to the public. They put it right out in front. Yeah. And around the same time all this is happening, we still have these UFO reports coming out
from the Pentagon and the leaked footage and everything else that's going on with that. And sometime we're in the mix of all this, I'm not exactly sure when the U.S. Navy was patenting alternative propulsions. Remember they had those weird patents? People were like, what are they doing?
The very high-level weird patents that we tried to break down in the podcast.
And realize that we're stupid. It's like, yeah, I can, we're going to take and that's why we like to use terms like helicopter view. We'll just give you a high-level overview of this stuff because we don't really know.
And we don't want to make buttholes of ourselves trying to break it down like some other places.
Yeah, we're like Big Bang Theory when it comes to this stuff. We can talk slightly about it and kind of make it funny, but at the end of the day, we don't know. I mean, come on. So, Space Force got created, made it a big public thing. We're going out into space. We're going to do what we got to do. We're making the Space Force, right? Brought that out into the public. And then, with the U.S. Navy patenting alternative propulsions and stuff like that, because I think we already perfected it, so that's why we're doing it. Drone swarm technology became a big thing. You had light shows in Taiwan doing it, where they got 500 little drones, and they're making little pretty pictures in the sky. And then here comes later on, now countries can buy able wingman technology, where you can take a fighter jet, and it comes with its own little swarm of drones there to do offensive or defensive things. You can buy them. I think Australia's got them. I think even New Zealand has them. So that's the technology that has gone from being sci-fi to, there it is, swarm technology, right?
Yeah.
And then we talk about the Colorado drone sightings like we sort of touched about before, and don't engage them.
And it was funny because don't engage them, but at that same time, that able wingman, that group of drone stuff, it's like the early sightings for Colorado were groups of drones, at least 2 or 3.
Kind of swarming around.
Yeah. And then disappearing. Right.
And then you have the UAP and the ATIP videos that were released, right? And this was a little bit earlier, and I don't know exactly when they were done, but I think it was early in 2002. But anyway, they got released in the Pentagon and the military news. We don't know what they are. And so what did they do? They added the ability to where now you can log and report these because congressmen wanted to find out what they knew. And so it became a way for them to report some things, right? And you can put it in logbooks now.
Yeah.
And so what we have now is we have this unexplained aerial phenomena, and the idea that it's now more out in the public and more public mainstream now is a thing. So now it takes sort of the edge off of everything. You're like, oh yeah, UFOs, whatever. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of this has happened as a way to out China and Russia. Because they've been building up, and they've been making their technology better and their warfighting capabilities better because China and Russia, China was less part of the Cold War than Russia was, have not stopped with the Cold War. They have not quit.
Okay.
They're still doing it. They're just ramping things up. And we're not even talking about cyber attacks, right? And collusions and all that crazy stuff. So I think that's because since China and Russia now have similar technology and it just can no longer be kept secret, that when you start to see this sort of thing and it's not secret, chances are that if you take the element of surprise or the secret capabilities of, high technology things and you put them out in the public, it sort of takes some of that ability away.
The element of surprise.
And all of that stuff. It's like with stealth technology. We had stealth for a long time.
Yeah.
And it was always the big thing. It was like, whoa, it was a game changer. Nobody knew what was going on. And now stealth technology that we have is sort of out there in the mainstream, and other countries have tried to duplicate it, that sort of thing. But once the cat's out of the bag, you lose, I think, a lot of your advantage. And I think the Russians and Chinese have pretty much lost some of their advantage with this sort of thing because I think that the U.S. has been slowly sort of putting it out there.
Almost like desensitizing.
Right.
Like when I talk about the paranormal community, like TV shows are, it's a demon, and every paranormal investigation has something haunted. So you're saying that slowly disseminating this information like stealth, because I remember in the 90s, every single techish or military movie talked about stealth.
Yeah, because it was this, unknown thing and whispered secrets. And do we really have stealth? We've had stealth, man, for a long time.
So you're saying it's desensitizing us to the point where we no longer consider it a threat, or?
It takes away, I think that if you know all about it, it takes away a lot of the impact you may have to be able to use that.
I'm thinking the meme, like, pulled a sneaky on you.
Yeah, because see, if everybody kind of knows about it and it's like, okay, so you got this technology and you're doing this and doing that, I think that the U.S. as a whole has better technology.
Yeah.
And has basically put it out there like, oh, so you got this going on? That's cool. We're not going to tell you what I got because we need to be on top of all this stuff because that's part of it. You don't want to go and attack or threaten a country or an entity if you know that they could just turn you to dust. You think twice about it. It's part of detente. And if the Cold War never died, and we have actually sort of gone a long way to not sort of keep that thing going, right? Because we've had in the past, our leadership has basically taken sort of a soft touch to all this sort of thing. And they're steadily sort of pushing the boundaries, these other countries and things like that, and probing our defenses and attacking us and doing all the, the Cold War stuff and being slightly more aggressive towards it. Then how, in a way, can you basically put it out there that you still have the military might or whatever and the military perception of how strong our military really is without sort of letting other countries or letting the world know that there's things out there? The weird thing is that they're saying, oh, we don't know what they are.
And see that, though, and I think we're talking to a different audience with that approach, because part of that is it sounds like Cold War style, these different countries, including the U.S., are playing a game of poker where nobody's showing their cards. However, you have the media out there telling people allegedly what everybody else's cards are.
Yeah.
And that's...
And the military's going, oh, yeah, we're not sure what they are.
That was a Cold War tactic and propaganda, but I'm saying this propaganda is misaligning on either side because we have really no idea what Chinese media is saying about our technology. We only have the assumption of what our media is saying about everybody's technology. Every
once in a while, something happens, I think, to kind of let other countries know, oh, you think you got this? Well, let me show you a little something. Okay.
Yeah.
So this was many years ago. The Chinese shot down one of their own satellites.
Okay.
Made a big mess, but they shot it down.
Yeah.
It was a big deal. And the entire world was like, man, they shot a satellite down from the ground with a missile. And then, I think it was about 8 months later, the U.S. Navy took a regular warship, just a run-of-the-mill destroyer, right, updated the software to the missile that they already have, that everybody in the fleet has, and shot one of our own satellites down using a kinetic weapon. And that's our way of showing China, that's great that you were able to do that using your most advanced technology. We just did it with a regular ship and a regular missile. Because that's our way of saying, we see what you did there. We can do that all day long. No problem. So that's one thing. The North Koreans, they were trying to launch some stuff, and just magically, their stuff was exploding on the launch pad. Using the same technology that Russia sold them and everything else, why would that just explode randomly out of nowhere?
All this has brought up something one of my relatives was talking about recently, like another Chinese rocket crash and how the Chinese were offering not the country, but the individual whose property the wreckage landed on, all this crazy money.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, this sounds familiar. Was this another attempt to show people up and also with the reward sway people a certain way?
No, I think they were trying to show off.
Yeah.
And now they're just trying to take care of what happened, to show that they're responsible.
Oh.
Come on, they shot the launch tower with the missile. Not with the missile, with the rocket. They shot their launch tower with it. Come on, man. And if it was like SpaceX, like a company trying to get into space and all that stuff, and they have, failures as they do, it's okay. This is supposed to be one of the most powerful nations on the planet, and they shot this stupid, come on. So at the end of the day, I think that there's a lot of outward sort of, hey, look how tough we are, and we are technologically advanced, and we are something to be worried about, and they're putting it out there in the public. And in some ways, these little media reports and things like that are slowly sort of cutting away, oh, you're a big tough guy? Well, you're not really, because of this, and this, right? And so if you look at all that stuff, right, our technology, I think, is still better, and it's harder for the Chinese and Russians to hide their technology, especially if it's sort of being kind of put out there. Russia no longer wants to be on the International Space Station. That's kind of sketchy, right? And we got drones that are just basically probing the defense capability of each other's militaries all the time. And we're sitting there going, yeah, we don't know what they are. Like, what is that? I don't know.
But see, okay, I have an art.
I think we do know. I think our stuff is a lot better. And I think a lot of this is just a way to go, what's out there? Because we're really sort of hiding what we really got.
And I am speaking to that younger next generation of UFO researchers and science-minded folks. If you keep playing dumb, people are going to treat you dumb.
Yeah.
That's going to backfire on the U.S.
Well, then you got to do something like, I don't know, shoot down a missile from any ship.
But how that translates to UFO
See, here's the thing,
culture.
though. It doesn't matter how it translates to you, the common plebeian. It only matters how it translates to the military, your opposing military, who has to be able to try to do the same thing.
I would disagree.
Then this is where I understand your disagreement, but I raise you military service and go, okay.
No,
Let me give you an example. So the Russians and some of their destroyers, you look at them, they got missiles all over them, these big ship-killing missiles, like 12 of them. Like, wow, that's a lot. And we don't have that sort of thing. We have, we have missiles as well, and we have these big ship missiles and stuff like that. Ours is set up a little differently. Well, I was in Russia, had a chance to take some tours because we were on a military base. It was one of those things, we're going to show up and everybody's going to be friendly, and we got to go take tours of these destroyers. In the way it was set up, if these guys launched one of these, ship-killing missiles, the exhaust from the rocket, the missile, would burn through the communication lines on that ship, so they could no longer communicate with anybody in their own fleet. That's kind of dumb, right?
Sure.
So what they did is they put another line of communication on the other side of the ship, so that when it burned through that one, they could use the other one to talk. Well, guess what's on the other side? More missiles. So it was things like that. We had this big idea that the Russians were just these crazy, super technologically advanced country, and they were of equal threat to us, and they kind of weren't.
No, what I'm saying is this persistent culture of we don't know what it is, we know it's out there now, that position that the U.S. government is taking when it comes to ufology, especially with the next coming generations of UFO researchers. If you just keep playing dumb like that and then shooting a rocket from a warship to knock a satellite out, unless you make the direct correlation, like, that's what we could do to a UFO, this younger generation of UFO researchers are not going to make that connection.
It doesn't matter what they think.
It matters as to whether or not they pursue or connect those dots.
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
I mean, really, honestly, to be blunt, who cares what they think? Are you more worried about maybe China having directed energy weapons that could burn a hole in anything on the planet? Or are you worried about some UFO guy who's talking all about UFOs? Who are you more worried about if you're the government?
The perception that your people and your journalistic community have is a direct reflection of you when translated to the rest of the world.
At the end of the day, if your job is to protect the country, right, you kind of want to make sure there's people around to protect.
Sure.
So who gets more priority? Who gets the credence to it? The UFO researcher / journalist? Or are you more worried about the other country and the threats of technology and everything else that they have? Who are you more worried about? I'm not worried about some reporter or an entire community, right, researching UFOs. I'm more worried about the guy with the missiles, right? I mean, honestly. Because I think that's how they look at it.
I'm not. That's not how, in the conversation of what people talk about and what is out there as far as information. Yes, the secrecy and all that stuff and the playing dumb, sure. But if looking at it from the researcher side, not the military side, if you keep playing dumb, people are going to lose respect. And if you don't make those connections and that transparency more transparent, people are going to fall out of favor on this. They're not going to care about what the military does, and they're not going to continue to pursue that avenue of truth.
And the government cares why?
Not the government, me.
Okay, you. But I mean, I understand where you're coming from. I'm just trying to say that in the grand scheme of things,
then that makes all of this a fruitless endeavor. Why should we continue researching UFOs?
Because every once in a while something pops up and gives you a glimmer of nope with the whole thing, and you go, wow, there really is something more out there. I think the U.S. is playing dumb. I think they're playing dumb because we've had this technology for a long time. I think the Chinese and the Russians are finally going to basically, since they're going to have more eyes on the entire thing because more people are interested in it, are finally going to show the hand that they have, and we're going to sit there and keep being quiet about what we actually have. And,
Also, my fear is, what if we're not actually, speak softly and carry a big stick? What if we don't even have a big stick?
So, in other words, like, what if we're bullshitting?
Yeah.
Then I'd rather sit here and play dumb and you don't know what I got. Because it could be a poker game. It could be a bluff. That's why I gave you the analogy of the Russian ship.
Yeah.
They fired off one missile. They couldn't talk to their whole fleet. That's dumb.
Yeah, that's like...
So you know how we fix it? Let's put another line of communication and run these cables above the deck, underneath the rocket launcher, on the other side of the ship so that we have that capability.
The kid who bought all the spikes from Hot Topic,
right?
One punch took him out.
When I'm walking on this ship and seeing the rust and things coming out of missile tubes that is unacceptable in the Navy, which means there's a high probability that missile won't even fire. Mm-hmm. All the big fear I had of the Soviet Union, because I was a sonar tech on a surface ship, hunt and track submarines, that sort of thing, kind of went away to a certain degree. They were still definitely a threat, but not like we think.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow. Because here's another example. The Soviets at the time had if they had to attack something, they shot a bunch of stuff at it.
Yeah.
We shoot one. We shoot a Tomahawk, go down the street. I mean, you had it during, like on TV, where it's like this Tomahawk missile's flying down the streets and making left and right-hand turns to get to a building.
Yeah. Soviets
would shoot 5 or 6 or 8 missiles and level the entire block just so they could get that one building. And a lot of it was, not because they are trying to send a message, because their weapon and technology, their weaponology was so crude that they didn't have it. So they had to do that. When the Russians say, we send a message. It's like, because you can't hit the side of a fence or a barn or whatever, because you just don't have the technology. Your guidance systems are weak. All of that stuff. So I think kind of what we got going on here, I think it's just kind of the beginnings of the Cold War being made more public, and this is like Cold War revisited. I think a lot of the technology is being exposed out there with some of the reports and stuff that we're seeing has been drug up to the light, and I think there's a lot of things that have been happening to sort of counteract everything that they've been doing. And I think that we're kind of letting on that we know what they got to a certain degree and trying to hide and playing dumb for the stuff that we have. And let me ask you a question. If you just say you're an alien from another world, another galaxy, why would you build a triangle?
I can't answer that because I don't know alien physics.
A sphere is better. An egg is considered one of the perfect shapes. Why would you build just this random, weird-looking triangle? Things like that. So I think a lot of what we see, triangle-shaped craft and all these things whizzing around, is modern, undisclosed technology. Now, on the other side of that, I do think there is a bunch of stuff that occurs, a bunch of sightings, and a bunch of experiences that have happened and that are still happening that we, as a planet, have nothing to do with. And that's what we should all be sort of freaked out about.
Okay.
I mean, think about it. would you rather, if you were trying to keep all your super high advanced technology a secret, would you rather let somebody believe that aliens are out there instead of going, we think you have stealth aircraft technology?
Yeah.
And a possibly secret air force, and you've colonized the moon?
But that
and Mars?
That goes back into that, like, what is his name? That one researcher. I wanted to say Nick Redfern, but that might be wrong. That whole believe the bigger lie mentality.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
And that bigger lie is what I like to call the okie doke.
Okay.
So I think that we have drones that use alternative propulsions and stuff like, okay, so you use the Omaha video, right, where the craft was flying alongside for like an hour or whatever it was next to the ship, and then all of a sudden it just disappeared in the ocean.
Yeah.
Okay, so what if you were, I don't know, a Chinese ship sitting 150 miles away, controlling this drone remotely, and it could be a sphere shape, it could be whatever shape you want, and you realize, oh, wow, we're being recorded. Huh. We've gone ahead and electronically recorded all the electronic signals from the ship that we want to get. We're done. I have the data. This drone only costs a couple $1,000s. Let's just go ahead and splash it. So you just turn the drone off and it hits the water and it sinks and the salt water melts all the crap on the inside. You'll never see it again.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing that says that drones have to have that sort of X or plus shape with propellers on top. I mean, they could be anything that flies. There's been videos of people flying lawnmowers around as remote-controlled aircraft, right? So, I mean, come on. I think a large chunk of what we see is actually other countries' technology, and I think some of ours as well. I mean, you can buy a slew of drones to fly around with your fighter jet. You know what I mean? You can get, like, signs at night and have an amazing, like, laser light show or just LED light show because you don't want to use fire producing things like firecrackers.
Yeah.
You see them. They have the technology, and DARPA's been working on a lot of stuff for a very long time. So I think a lot of what's happening now in this big disclosure that's going to show up is probably going to be, there is technology out there, right? Kind of like stealth technology became more commonplace, more well-known, and all of a sudden everybody knows we have stealth fighters. They don't necessarily know how it happens, but they know we do have it. I think that's what's going to happen. I think it's mostly drones. Okay. But they should definitely keep in some scattering, of events and things that occur that we just can't explain. So, I don't know. I mean, I think it'd be kind of cool if they actually came out and said, guess what? Mars colonized it. Moon colonized that too. We got a space force. We've been doing that stuff since the 60s. The moon landing was a fake because we were landing on Mars.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. We hang out on the dark side of the moon. Oh, and the moon? It's a satellite. Been here for 1 billion years.
It's cheese.
Yeah. It's metal. Come on. It's a satellite. That's why it doesn't ever really deviate and it doesn't spin or anything. It's cool. We are way more advanced than you think. Oh, and the Stargate, it's real. We found it.
Okay.
What if it's all true? And Bigfoots are real.
But see, I'm also to the point, and this is beyond UFOs. I'm getting to the point now where either show your cards, tell the truth, give us something. I mean, and it's funny because 2-3 years ago, everybody was to the point where they were like, either tell us UFOs are real or not. And then the media shifted and then attitudes changed where it's like, we're not going to tell you they're real or not. We're going to tell you we know there's something out there. And mentally and emotionally, I'm getting that way with a lot of this phenomenon.
Yeah.
So
it's almost like we need a diversionary tactic to take the entire heat off of all of this stuff.
Memes.
No.
I know.
I don't know. It's just an idea. I think a lot of the stuff that we're actually seeing is just, I still go back to thinking that, 80% of what's out there is really just military technology that we're not supposed to know about, that we're not supposed to see. I think that there's lots of airships out there. They're more modern. They're more advanced that, I think there's a lot more advancements in stealth technology. I think it's all part of that to a certain degree, but I also, do I believe in aliens? I kind of think There's something going on out there, for real. I mean, who knows? We'll probably never know. So there you go. There's my unpopular opinion.
Okay.
And there's going to be people out there that'll bring up examples of stuff that's unexplainable. And yes, that's the good stuff. That's the stuff.
Yeah.
That's the stuff that we need to look at.
The good examples.
Yeah. And like, yeah, I agree with you. I have no idea. But when you say, yeah, there was this orb, 6-foot spherical orb whizzing around the ship, flying around, is that possible? It's a drone. It's acting like a probe. It's actually acting like a Foo Fighter. So what if this whole Foo Fighter thing was advanced technology back in the 40s? It's been slightly perfected now.
You can send some of those good examples to contact@creepgeeks.com.
That's Omi's way of saying, I'm done listening to you ramble. So, thank you.
I didn't say that.
Did you?
I did say I want to see something compelling. That's where I'm getting at with a lot of this.
Yeah.
I need more compelling stuff.
Well, speaking of compelling stuff, if you have anything you would like to share, you can share it.
Yes. Find us on social media. Like we said earlier, CreepGeeks Podcast or CreepGeeks Pod. You should find us on nearly every platform. Do want to encourage you guys to check out our TikTok. We've been curating that and trying to get some good content on there. Join the Facebook group. We didn't mention that earlier, but CreepGeeks Facebook group. It's a great place to share ideas, feedback, suggestion for shows. If you have a topic or an experience you want us to talk about, it's a great place to put that there. Pretty much that's about it.
Yeah.
Oh, I do want to thank our Patreon supporters. If you'd like to support us on Patreon, you can do that by going to patreon.com/creepgeeks. And yeah.
There you go. And for those of you that are super detail oriented out there, listen to all this and go, man, he didn't give us any real facts, figures, or details. Yeah, you're right. So, I like it. I just don't want to live in that rabbit hole. Just saying. So there you go. Anyway, if you've enjoyed the podcast, please come back and listen to us again. We do it every week, and if you subscribe on any podcast player, it'll show up.
Oh, and we do have some book recommendations.
Oh, yeah.
So if you are into those facts and figures in that history, there are some book recommendations at the bottom of the podcast notes regarding Project UFO, Foo Fighters, and other UFO-related phenomenon.
Yes.
So check those out.
Very nice.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway, there you go. So any questions, comments, concerns, let us know. We do appreciate you taking time to listen. If you listened all the way through and you have an opinion or a question or something that you'd like to let us know,
yep,
or tell us about, we have emails and that sort of thing. You can basically send us an email at contact@creepgeeks.com, or you can go to our website, and there is a little button you can click on that says contact, and you can fill it out there, or you can do it on Facebook.
Yeah.
So you have lots of different ways to let us know how wrong we are. So anyway, there you go. So see you later. Take it easy. Bye-bye.
Bye.